שלום וברוכים הבאים וברוכות הבאות לדוקאביב 2021. אנחנו עם בימאי הסרט המורדות, פדרו קוס. אני אשאל אותו מספר שאלות, השיחה תתקיים באנגלית כמובן. אם יש מישהו שצופה בלייב, אתם יכולים לשלוח לנו שאלות ואנחנו נתייחס אליהם. Welcome to Docaviv 2021. We have the honor to talk to the director of the film Rebel Hearts, Pedro Kos. Hi, Pedro. We've been chatting a little bit behind the scenes, and now it's time for a real conversation. So first of all, Pedro, thank you for a very interesting and very illuminating film. It was very surprising to hear this story from the 60s that I've never heard mentioned before. Some nugget of history that was really hidden, and it's really a gem that I was really happy that you uncovered for us. So first of all, if you could talk a little bit about the background, how you came across the story, how you found out this really unusual story.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much, Daphna, and the whole Docaviv team. So honored and excited to be here. I wish I could be there in person, but you know, hopefully another time.
With your next film.
Yes, hopefully, yes. Thank you. I would love that. And this film came to me really as it was a wonderful surprise. I've been living in Los Angeles for a very long time, since 2002. I live about 5 minutes away from the Immaculate Heart campus, from you know, it's very close by, and I had no idea about this story. And one of the things that happened in 2015, so about 6 years ago, a dear friend of mine called Kira Carstensen approached me with Shawnee Isaac Smith, who is our writer-producer. And Shawnee had been interviewing and documenting these extraordinary women since the late 90s. So over 20 years, she had been introduced to the community and discovered this extraordinary story, and said, you know, thought like, oh my God, exactly like you reacted, like, wow, I had no idea about this. And this is a story that is, you know, very inspiring, and that is very much a hero's journey. And she decided, and at that time, most of the women were alive and well, and so she decided to ask for permission from the community, and they agreed that a documentary would be good to make about them. And so she went about to interview them, and interviewed Anita Caspary and Pat Reef and Helen Kelly, and these geniuses, these brilliant minds who...
On film? She did everything on film?
At that time was in DV. It was so the early 2000s, and got these extraordinary firsthand accounts from these women, and did so for a number of years, and amassed really extraordinary, I call it, treasure of firsthand accounts, and also began assembling some of the archival footage that you see in the film, so that when she connected with Kira years later and they brought this project to me, I was blown away. I grew up Catholic in Brazil, and the story of these women who were moved by their faith and saw beyond an institution was very refreshing and reassuring. And I wish I had known the story, much earlier in my life. And I knew I had to help tell the story. It was literally like love at first sight. And so we embarked on a journey, and we began to film some more, for me, it was always a story about the current moment, about the present. And it's such a current story. And also one that I think is timeless and universal. And so I began to film with the community again some more, additional interviews in order really to ground it in the current moment, to make it, to dialogue with the present and really enliven in a way that like we can all relate to this. And also began digging more for all the more treasure troves, more archives. And we found some, if you dig, you will find. We searched far and wide, and we found some incredible treasures like audios and correspondence and footage of the cardinal. All these things. It's a very long painstaking process that took many years, but it was very worth the effort, and that's how Rebel Hearts came to be.
What for you? What is the most relevant thing for today, from your perspective in this story? What is the most relevant message or value?
Yeah, I mean, there are a few, but the story is really is a meditation on change, right? And how, for me, one of the main things, and how change happens, and how it's a continuing effort, and it requires dedication, perseverance, patience, and ongoing work, and a lot of sacrifice. And really, one of the things that, as they're working towards to change, and really they came together as a community and stood their ground, and did not compromise on their values. And in order to be faithful to what they believed in, and to see that change flourish and have an impact, and see beyond the institution, these oppressive institutions that govern them, for them, the Catholic Church. But now, as we go about, especially here in the United States, there's a continuing movements for social justice, for greater equality. It is again tapping into communities of shared values, and coming together to really push for a more just world, exactly what they were doing. And if one of the things that, if you look at the signs of the protests that they were taking part in the 1960s, it feels like there are signs that we see in the protests today, for greater racial equality, for women's rights, for social justice movements in general today that we see out in the streets, are so similar to those that they were carrying. And for example, one of the things that it was really chilling to, as we were editing the film last year, and we had the extraordinary movements of racial equality, Black Lives Matter and everything here in the United States, and really waking up to the so many people were waking up to the oppression that the African Americans were under for centuries in this country. I thought back to Patrice Underwood, who went to Marston and Selma in 1965 with Martin Luther King. And when she went, she says, she was afraid of white people, that she had never, it was the first time that she was afraid of white people, and that she understood the oppression and that they were living. And that is what we were experiencing as a society in many ways last year, is sort of that awakening. And it's that spirit calling for the greater equality, for a more just world. This is what these women were fighting for, to be a part of that world and to change the world. We have the saying in English, the arc of the moral universe is a long one, but it bends towards justice. And that's what these women were really fighting for.
It progresses so slowly. If you think about watching the film and seeing a group of nuns in the 60s, they were so dedicated. You call the film Rebel Hearts because they were rebellious, but I think they were acting out of the same faith that made them go and be a nun, go to the, join the church and dedicate themselves to Christianity. And yet 50 years later, I mean,
Exactly.
watching them do all these things and, you know, stand around and everything, that, like you said, it's almost euphoric watching it. It gives me, I fell in love with them automatically, immediately when I was watching, really. But yet, when you come to think of it, 50 years later, still people are having to march and
Yeah.
protest and fight for the same things, for the same changes. Everything is changing so slowly.
Yeah. In many ways it is. And I think that's the nature of change. To enact change, unfortunately, it requires, I think, a lot of that, feeling like we're fighting the same. It's an ongoing battle. It's an ongoing movement. Lenore says a movement is a movement. By definition, it keeps going. So it's, you know, as the Immaculate Heart Sisters taught me, it's not something you can just check off the box, you know, like, oh, you know, finish that, you know, let's move on to the next. No, it is a day-to-day battle. It is, it requires a lot of patience, love, and perseverance.
You know, one of the things that were really endearing was watching the way that it was as if they were surprised that somebody in the clergy was actually against what they were doing, because they were so convinced that this is what Jesus would have done. I mean, joining the civil rights movement, marches and all this, giving us all this love, treating people as human beings, despite color or race or whatever. All that, it seemed as if they were actually surprised that somebody you know, were criticizing them or was afraid of what they were doing.
Yeah. And I love that you said that word, because that's, I think, what it exactly, that the hierarchy of the church, they were afraid. They were
because of change. Yeah, because of change.
Exactly. And that instilled so much fear in, especially here in Los Angeles with Cardinal McIntyre. But they were really, you know, they felt like they were doing they were following the faith. They were following what Vatican II, the Second Vatican Council, was calling all religious communities around the world to do, to be a part of the world, to open the doors. And that's what, and the thing about the Immaculate Heart Sisters, they were one of the most well-educated religious communities in the United States. They had more degrees, masters, PhDs among the college faculty than all the priests in Los Angeles combined. And they were also, you know, in the United States, they were definitely one of the most, you know, better prepared, more educated. So when these decrees of the Second Vatican Council come out to tell them reform, to be a part of the world, they were very discerning, meaning they're critical thinkers. They asked the tough questions. They dug deep. And when they did that, you know, they started to think out, you know, they always thought outside the box. And this is something that they were already used to doing as a group. So, you know, they were trying to serve, right? They were trying, how can we be the best teachers? How can we be the best educators? How can we participate, be a part of the world? And so these reforms that they were doing came out of a lot of discussions, a lot of thought. It wasn't something impulsive. It was something that was debated, meditated, and it was very deliberate. And so when they started to run up against the resistance, it was surprising, right? Because they were like, well, we thought we were just following what you told us to do. So if you ask them, they didn't think they were being rebels.
Yeah, and it's very surprising to see from an outsider point of view, because I think mainly, I know of nuns from, I don't know, books and movies and history lessons. You know, I live in a Jewish state. There's not a lot of Catholic churches here and whatever. But the image I had was of a very submissive woman whose day is very they have like a routine of prayer or whatever, and very little room for self-doubt or criticism or critical thinking. They're not supposed to engage in critical thinking at all because everything is dictated. That's my view. I don't know. You grew up Catholic. You tell me if you had different thoughts about nuns.
What it's very interesting that you said. I think yeah, that was my impression as well, growing up Catholic. And I think that was very much the impression of Cardinal McIntyre, you know, who was the head of the Catholic Church here in Los Angeles, with the Archbishop, meaning he's the head of the church here in Los Angeles. He also thought that, you know, nuns should be obedient, they should not question. And that's, you know, growing up, you know, I had a similar image as well. You know, except Julie Andrews in The Sound of Music, but you know, that was in the movies. But
in the movies, excuse me for interrupting, but in the movies, the only time when a nun questions some things that are told to her by the church is when she falls in love with the man, and then she has to decide if she chooses to remain faithful to Christianity and Jesus, or she follows her heart or whatever. That's the only way Hollywood describes these conflicts.
Exactly.
It's never that, you know, I want social justice and the church isn't really serving these values that I believe in. It's a much deeper conflict.
Yeah,
that they came across.
It really is, and I think, you know, you talk about them as, you know, not seeing none as critical thinkers. Well, this group of extremely well-educated women were extraordinary critical thinkers, and those were that was a core value that they had, and they passed on to their students and to their other sisters, because that's for them, as educators, they thought they had to be critical thinkers, and that's the way that they thought they were following their true faith. One of the things that Helen Kelly says, it's not in the film, but it's always stayed with me. She says that obedience is to follow what the Spirit is calling you to do. It is a higher obedience. It's not obedience to a man or to a power structure. It's obedience to core values and to your faith.
Why did you
and that's what they were
from the film?
Because in a way it was already said in different ways, and at that it felt, in the moment where it came in the film, it was redundant. It didn't but one of the things is that they were being obedient to a higher calling, and they were betrayed by the institution, by that structure that was actually telling them to disobey, and they were even telling them to lie. They're saying, oh, just pretend, you know, keep the habit in the closet, you know. And that for them was probably the biggest betrayal. You know, it's in many ways, this is the story of a relationship like, you know, you said, you know, that you talked about like how Hollywood portrays as, you know, the women who fall in love, you know, they're choosing between a man and, you know, it's the love to God. But this is, for them, it was, they fell in love with an ideal, with a community, with the faith and what the faith was calling them to do. And the supposedly keeper of that faith, that institution, you know, turns out and betrays them. And that hurt.
It turns out that the keeper is not the keeper of the faith, but the keeper of its own status or power.
Exactly.
Yeah, like often you discover when you confront an institution. But they, I think one of the main threats this institution felt was when the nuns all of a sudden had even political views that they wanted to express, like denouncing the Vietnam War,
Mm-hmm.
um, which was very, um, it came in a very sensitive moment in American culture, I think. And
Yeah,
all, I mean, yeah.
very much so.
And all of a sudden they had, I mean, you bring even these quite, it's not funny, but it's very colorful aspects of the change that they demanded, was when you describe how they wanted to change, you mentioned that their habits, they wanted to change their uniform, or how they were presenting outside of the church, and the deep interest they had in art.
Yeah, exactly.
And all of a sudden, art is also like a branch of free thinking. It's like
Mm-hmm.
a way of expression, personal expression, all of a sudden, which can also be a threat to institutions.
Yeah. And it was all about really breaking down barriers that separated them from the world, the habit, being one of them. It was something that was really separating them from their students and from the people. And art was a way to connect, Sister Carita's art, for example, takes things from everyday life, from, the Wonder Bread, to all these things that we see every day, and is to really find the sacred in the everyday. Is to recognize that we're all special and unique, and have that dialogue with what we're dealing with every day. And that was really, I think, really at the core of a lot of things that they did. And it came out in art. It came out in the way that they taught. It came out in all these beautiful different ways. In the movements that they took part in, and how they prayed, and how they lived in community. And that is kind of like tearing down walls, tearing down barriers, is really all about sort of creating that connection and that dialogue, I think, as well.
You mentioned Sister Corita, and we should say it's Corita Kent, who
Yes.
became a really appreciated artist. I mean, she's really quite known for her art. And I think she was she one of those who left the faith as well?
She was.
They
She
left
actually,
the
yeah, she left the church. She uh in 1968, after a lot of this happened, she went to Boston for a year of sabbatical, and then never returned. And everyone says that, as you hear in the film, that she really felt betrayed by the church, and it was, and I think she was also very exhausted. And because of her art, she became one of the main targets, of um, of the cardinal's wrath and anger. And so for her, I think it was, I mean, I can't speak for her, but it definitely, she left. She left the community, she left the faith, and she continued to be an artist in Boston until she passed away in 1986. But I think she's becoming to, she's getting more recognized today. She's definitely one of the icons of pop art, and she's really overdue for the recognition that she really deserves, to be be recognized as one of the great artists of the second half of the 20th century. And hopefully more and more people can really get to know her art and her work. And she was also an extraordinary teacher as well.
And how many of this original group of nuns that eventually left the institution and, you know, established their own order, how many still survive or still live in this same sort of group together?
Yeah, so the group, yeah, the group, which is now called the Immaculate Heart Community, still exists in Los Angeles, and they're still thriving. They have, I think, almost 150 members today. And
so
they're
it's a new generation that has joined them.
Exactly, a new generation of men and women. Now they're open to.
Oh, now they're open to, yeah, okay.
And they're open to anyone from any Christian faith is welcome to join the group. And they're still very active. They're active with immigrant rights, with racial equality, with environmental, all these sorts of movements, with women's rights. They're very active in many different ways. And they now are, they're not just teachers, they're all sorts of careers, you know, and they're lawyers, doctors, writers, you know, thinkers. There's two women who are underground Roman Catholic women priests, which is definitely not allowed in the church. But there's an underground, there's an order of women priests that, and Rosa, for example, who was educated by these women, is one of them.
We found your next film.
Yes.
Yeah, we just on your next film, yeah.
So yeah, they continue, and you know, many of the you know, when the split happened, over 300 of them, you know, a great majority of the women left. So I think it was over 300. And then they formed the Immaculate Heart Community. And then the new generation. So most of the elders, most of the original women sadly are no longer with us, but they planted beautiful seeds. As Rosa says, you know, they tried to bury us, but they didn't know that we were seeds. And I think that's a
beautiful sentence. Yeah. And I assume that challenges will always, you know, they will always have new challenges for the new generation of, yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Pedro.
Thank you,
It was
Daphna.
lovely talking to you. Thank you for your time, and thank you for the lovely film.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor to speak with you today.
And maybe see you in the future here in Tel Aviv.
Yes, I hope so. See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.